Opening day just over 2 weeks away in Gainesville, Florida. Kevin O'Sullivan and the Gators take the field once again with sights set on Omaha. Helping us break it all down, friend of the show, friend of mine, Nick Marcinko of Gator Country, does a fantastic job talking all things Florida Gators, but especially Florida on the diamond. Nick, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time. How's that golf swing these days, by the way? I know the last time I was down there was for the football game. You and I got it in on the links.
Yeah. No, I didn't. I'm definitely. I didn't play as well with you as I normally do, but no, I haven't actually got out and been on the links. With the transfer portal going on, and now Florida baseball's picking up. Florida basketball plays tonight, so it's been a busy last few weeks, but definitely need to get back out there.
Nick, before we dive into this 2026 season, 2026 campaign, which, again, every year under Kevin O'Sullivan, every year for Florida, I think the goals and the expectations, they never really change, right? It's to get back to Omaha, have a chance to win a national championship. But, dude, what a wacky season 2025 was for Florida. I mean, unlike any, I think, in the Kevin O'Sullivan era, and the record and what you see on paper really doesn't tell the full story because – you see 39-22, 15-15 in SEC play. Obviously, the season ends in the Conway Regional up there, Coastal Carolina hosting, which that's a whole other separate thing we can get to in a second. But people may forget, Florida started 1-11 in conference play and became the first ever team in the history of the SEC to do so and still make the postseason. Nick, what do you think? Has Kevin O'Sullivan, has Florida, have some of the players talked about maybe what they were to take away and what they learned in a season like that? Because that's a season where it's obviously really gonna test your merit and test your want to and how bad you want it. But I feel like also too, there's got to be some confidence, Nick, from those around Florida baseball that, hey, no matter what happens, you probably aren't going to start 1-11 again. I don't know how much worse it can really get, and especially you think about the way the injuries piled up, and I'm sure many folks are just happy to see the 2025 calendar year be put in the rear view.
Right, and you're absolutely correct. Like, that team was pushed to the limit. I mean, their back was against the wall, and there was still over half the season left. And when you put it into that perspective, it's really, really insane what happened. And we were actually just talking about this in the press box. People forget that Florida team started 11-0, and so it's almost like the start of the season was great, the end of the season was phenomenal. And then in the middle somewhere there, it just got lost. But that's how baseball goes. And we really haven't gotten a chance to kind of talk to this new team about last season. Obviously, we talked to last year's ball club, at the end, and but they were pushed to the limit. And there's something to be said when you can kind of fight out of that. And look, a lot of the credit goes to Kevin O'Sullivan. And I know he's gotten some flack. For the last 2 years because they just haven't been up to the ridiculously high standard that Florida baseball has. But it really, if you look into it, Florida in the last 6 weeks of last season had the best ERA in the SEC. And that's not a coincidence. That's Kevin O'Sullivan developing his players. And that's one thing that I appreciate about Florida baseball is it always seems like they play their best when it matters the most. And it just so happened last year that it mattered a little too early in the season. But yeah.
Speaking of Kevin O'Sullivan, Nick, we have to spend some time discussing the head man down there in Gainesville because it was an interesting season for him too, obviously. And you're right. The way they turned it around second half of the season, some really notable series wins. I think it led to many of us believing that maybe Florida was on the verge of making a run in the postseason. And it came to an end in Conway. I think that was a team, it just looked like, ran out of gas, the way they rebounded, and the injuries just continued to pile up one after the other. But, not to reopen old scabs, if you will, but what happened in the Conway Regional it was a chain reaction of, again, probably the most interesting offseason of Kevin O'Sullivan's career. There's video of him. The game time gets changed. He essentially goes on a tirade. There's video of it surfacing. He then gets the suspension. He'll be out for the first 3 games of the season when I believe it's UAB that Florida opens up against. So he'll be out for that series. He took a leave of absence during fall practice, which is something we don't normally see. I'm sure you were getting blown up. I was getting blown up. Hey, is Sully done? Is he? And he's like, hey, he's coming back. But I'm sure, again, I know you guys are going to talk to Kevin O'Sullivan more as the preseason practice goes on. I would imagine the sentiment from him is going to be also, by the way, Chuck Giralman goes to Tennessee. It's just like one thing after another. I'm sure he's just excited to get back to baseball and get away from all this off-field drama, all this off-field craziness. Like, obviously you have to deal with the suspension the first weekend, but I'd have to imagine everybody around there is just really excited to get back to baseball and get away from some of the chaos that was the offseason.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, it was, when you think about a baseball offseason, you don't really think, too much into anything that happened. I mean, you go out and you catch a spring scrimmage, you catch a fall scrimmage, you're seeing how the roster's shaping up. You're trying to figure out what you have. Well, that really wasn't the case this offseason. One thing after another kept piling up, but ultimately, I think Kevin O'Sullivan is just ready to get this season underway, and he believes in this roster. And this is one that I think they're ranked 13th in the preseason poll, but he believes that this roster can do some damage, and I think he's really excited to get back out there and show what they can do.
Nick, you make the point as we move the attention to this Florida club in the 2026 season. The preseason ranked in the top 15 via D1 baseball, 13 to be exact. And it is interesting, while they're ranked there, it feels like Florida's kind of being somewhat slept on when you think about the pedigree of this program and the talent that they have. It's always been power for Sully's clubs, whether that's at the plate or on the mound. And I want to start with the guys swinging the stick, and certainly they've got power in the lineup. Going to be led by a guy like Brendan Lawson, who really burst on the scene as a true freshman. 10 home runs in that campaign, had double digits. You get Cade Curlin back from injury. They obviously boosted in the portal with a guy like Carson Bowen from TCU, Surowick that comes over from Ole Miss, Sam Miller from Columbia, who had 16 jacks as well. Hayden Yost is back. Blake Sears back. Kyle Jones is back. So a lot of returning experience, but some new guys mixed in via the portal as well. But am I accurate in saying it's going to be another power-driven lineup for the Gators?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, one of my concerns entering the offseason was actually, the power component, because if you look at who Florida lost, right? They lost Colby Shelton, Luke Heyman, Bobby Bozer, Brody Donay. And you look at that is some serious pop in the lineup that they had to replace. They did go out and attack the portal, right? They went and got Ethan Surowick from Ole Miss, a guy who had 16 at-bats for the Rebels as a true freshman, hit 2 home runs in those 16 at-bats. And Florida went out and kind of looked a lot at his high school stuff, his high school tape, his showcases, and they thought, hey, this guy could be a really, really powerful addition to the program. And turns out he goes to the Northwoods League, hits 17 jacks, wins Northwoods League MVP, and the kid is unbelievable. I mean, he has 25, 30 home run power in the SEC as a true sophomore. Just today, I'm live at Condren Family Ballpark watching one of Florida's spring scrimmages. Ethan Surowick has 2 home runs in probably both of his at-bats. I don't know. Yeah, I think he has 2 at-bats, 2 home runs, hit 1 2 days ago. He is in that success in the summer league carried over to the fall, and now we're seeing it carry over to the spring. That he's going to be a monster. He's probably going to be hitting the 3-hole for Florida. And then another guy I think that I don't even think you named, but has really, really come alive in recent weeks is Caden McDonald. He's a 2-way player for Florida. He pitches, hits. They've kind of tinkered with both a little bit. But he is slugging at the plate right now, and that he also has 15, 20, 25 home run power if he can reach his potential. But yeah, I think I have growing confidence, I think, in the power aspect of the game. But then you also look at a guy like Kyle Jones, who he might not bring kind of that pop to the lineup, but he's your typical leadoff guy, right? And I think you need somebody like that. Hey, this guy can get on base, he can steal bags, get in scoring position. And so, I look at this lineup and, at first I was concerned about the power aspect, but as we're getting closer to the season, I've increased my confidence level that this team can swing it with the best of them in the SEC, and they certainly have shown that to start spring camp.
Well, certainly, Nick, where there were no questions of power at any point is on the mound. It's always power arms for Florida, and certainly when you return the 1-2 punch of Liam Peterson and Aiden King, who last year came on the scene as a freshman. I mean, what he did was astonishing. 7-2, 2.58 ERA. When you've got the 1-2 punch of those two guys, that is a pretty good place to start. Again, I think if both those guys live up to the billing and live up to what they can be, that could be your best 1-2 punch in college baseball. So you start there. There's a lot of depth. You bring in Sandifer from Central Florida, who I know Florida's really, really excited about. Luke McNeely is going to factor in as well. I thought there were a ton of young guys in the bullpen last year that got their feet wet that are going to be big contributors this year. Just talk about what you're expecting from the pitching staff. And again, that 1-2 punch, I know Liam Peterson's a guy that we all want to see more out of, it seems. But I think the reasoning for that, obviously, is because if he taps into it, the sky's the limit. I mean, we're talking about a guy who could be a top 5 pick in the MLB draft.
Yeah, if he taps into it, he's probably the first pick in the draft, or like you said, top 5. But yeah, I mean, Chris, people always ask me, what's the strength of this 2026 club? And I always tell them, I don't think there's many teams in the country that feel better about their 1-2 punch than Florida does. I mean, you have two. I know Aiden King's only a sophomore, but he had tons of experience, obviously, last year in his historic freshman campaign. But you got two guys with lots of experience coming back. They're both very, very talented. They both sit atop their respective MLB draft classes. Liam's up there, King's up there in the 2027 class. And so when you look at it like that, it's like Florida. Those guys are giving Florida a chance to win every single Friday and Saturday, regardless of the opponent. And, we briefly talked about how talented the SEC is. I think they have 11 teams ranked in the top 25, 5 in the top 10. Florida's going to face a ton of good teams. But I think with Peterson and King on Friday and Saturday, you're giving yourself a chance to beat these teams every single time you play them. No matter, they're throwing their ace, fine. Every single time you play them, you're giving them a chance to win. And I think that's important. And, you mentioned the returning players. Florida had 9 true freshman pitchers last year. They led the SEC in freshman inning pitched, freshman inning percentage, total usage. They were the youngest pitching staff in the SEC last year by almost a full year. And so when you look at it like that, Florida is getting quite a few guys back that, you're hoping they take that second-year jump. And this is Kevin O'Sullivan's bread and butter, is developing pitchers. So I think that's an area where, hey, you look at this roster, they return a bunch of guys. What can Coach Sully do? That this is what he does. He's made a career off of developing pitchers. And so I think, there's optimism there as well.
Nick, not all schedules in the SEC are built equally, obviously. When you take a look at this schedule, obviously in non-conference, you get it going. Like I mentioned, Kevin O'Sullivan will be, I guess, hanging out at the house for the first 3 games. But you got a notable non-conference series at Miami. Of course, we were at that one last year in Gainesville when the Gators got the best of the Canes 2 out of 3. But you go down to Coral Gables, which will be a good early season test at the end of the month of February. Of course, in non-conference, you've got your friends from Tallahassee, Florida, and the Florida State Seminoles. But you get into SEC play, South Carolina at home, at Bama. You go to Arkansas. You got Ole Miss on your home field, at Georgia, Auburn at home. I'm going through all of them here. Texas A&M at home, at Oklahoma, Kentucky, and then at LSU to close it out, which will be a really fun one in Baton Rouge. Just thoughts on the Gators schedule. I mean, you and I both agree there's no such thing as like a soft schedule per se in the SEC, but thoughts on the way the schedule sets up and the challenges it presents.
I think it's it's funny. You can't really call any schedule in the SEC a favorable schedule. It just doesn't exist. The top to bottom, the conference is unbelievable every single year. When I look at the schedule, the first 2 things that jump out to me is, the road series, is because it's really tough to win on the road in the SEC. And so I look at that series against Arkansas, and that's kind of, towards the beginning of the schedule a little bit. I think it's the 3rd SEC series, if I'm not mistaken. And that to me is a big one, right? Because we talked about it earlier. Florida started 1-11 last year in SEC play. You obviously would like to think that they're not going to do that again. But, that's easier said than done when you go into Arkansas and you got to play them in a 3-game series. So I think, I have that one circled as an early season one that I think the key in the SEC is avoiding sweeps, to be honest with you, especially on the road. You just do not want to get swept. And then the last thing I'm looking at is that series that you mentioned, LSU. I mean, it seems like everyone's kind of crowning LSU right now as, the top team in the SEC, and they very well may be. But, obviously that's a big one. It's going to be a fun one. And you mentioned Miami, which I'm going to try to make it down to Coral Gables this year. Because the one thing I've noticed, I think it's my fourth year covering Florida baseball. Those boys don't like Miami. And I know SEC rivalries and Florida Georgia, Florida LSU and baseball, like there's different rivalries kind of within the schedule, but that one against Miami is different. Florida and Miami do not like each other in baseball. I tell people all the time, I think it's my favorite Florida baseball kind of rivalry series. FSU would be up there, Chris, but for some reason we still don't play them on the weekend, which to me doesn't make any sense. I don't see the value in playing, a rival school on random Tuesdays throughout the season, and I think it kind of ruins like the atmosphere because when I watch two rivals face off, I want to see ace on ace Friday night. But instead they do the Tuesday, Wednesday deal throughout the season, and it's all different days. And, you just never know who's throwing. To me, it's not that fun.
Certainly going to be a fun season, Nick. When you look at this group for the Gators, again, you've seen them in person. You're there right now, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So you know the strengths, the weaknesses, the warts of this team, if you will. Pick to click for the Gators. Like you mentioned, it's crazy to say it's been a disappointing last couple of years, but when you win a national championship in 2017 and the standard is the standard, it is the expectation. Nobody has higher expectations than Kevin O'Sullivan and his staff and his club. If they're going to do that, if they're going to get back to Omaha, let's say, because once you get to there, who knows where the chips may fall. If this club is to make a run back to Omaha, what for you are the things that have to click for the Gators to get back there?
I would say the first thing that stands out to me is they have to find a reliable lefty. There's only 5 on the roster. They dipped into the portal for a D2 guy who actually has looked really good. His name's Ernesto Lugo. But to me, when I watch teams, I like to see strong lefties out of the pen. And out of the 5 lefties Florida has on the roster, only 3 of them are true freshmen. So to me, that's an area of concern. I like to see, late inning situation, teams got back-to-back lefties coming up, who can go in there and get you out of that inning. And so I think they've got to develop on that front as well, and really just develop the pitching staff in general. We just talked about it. All these returning guys, they're expecting to take a second-year jump. Well, some of those guys are going to have to take second-year jumps if Florida's going to want to get, to where they go. And on offense, I'll say I mentioned the power earlier, and I do believe Florida has enough power, but I still think that they're going to have guys. Like I said, I mentioned Caden McDonald earlier. He's a guy who really hasn't played all that much in his 2 years here. He's a guy that I'm circling as, hey, this could be an X factor. And then the other thing, Chris, is the roster has to stay healthy. Look, this goes for everyone. I mean, we've seen, I think, just in the last 48 hours, we've seen 2 SEC pitchers already go down for the year. Texas A&M had a sophomore, I think, out for the year, and then I just saw South Carolina's ace out for the year. So this is, it doesn't. Injuries happen in sports, right? But this kind of doesn't go talked about enough. Like Florida, they have to stay healthy. I mean, they lost. I think last year you could argue 4 of their top 5 hitters were out. I mean, you had Cade Curlin out for the entire season, pretty much. Kyle Jones, same thing. And then late in the season, you lost Luke Heyman and Colby Shelton. And so, you said that they ran out of steam. I don't know if they ran out of steam as much as they were just kind of outmanned. And that's crazy to say at a place like Florida. But when you lose 4 of your 5 players, best hitters, well, it's gonna be hard. And so I think the other thing is they just have to stay healthy. It feels like the last few years they've kind of lost some guys just throughout the season, even before the season. So I think that's a priority too, because I can tell you right now, this Florida team, if they stay healthy, is going to have a chance to make a run at Omaha.
Nick, I'm sure, again, it's a conversation around there, and it's a question I'm going to ask you because I almost feel like I have to, because people want to know. Do you see any possibility of there being a hangover effect or essentially the stuff that happened off the field with Kevin O'Sullivan bleeding into the fall with his leave of absence. Is there any way, is there any concern in your mind that lingers and somehow has a negative effect on this ball club?
I really don't think so. This group has a good head on their shoulders. They know that this is, this is their job. They come out here and this is where, this is what they're doing. And I also, the other thing I wanted to mention was Florida hired Tom Slater, who seems to be kind of a good locker room guy. A lot of guys have had a lot of good things to say about him. I personally haven't met him yet, although I will meet him, opening weekend when Kevin O'Sullivan is suspended. But yeah, I don't envision that being an issue at all, Chris. I really don't. I think this team's got a good head on their shoulders, and like I said, this is what they do. So no, I don't see it being an issue.
February the 13th, UAB will come to town, Gainesville, Florida, for a 3-game set, and we'll be off and running on the 2026 Gators baseball season. Nick, really appreciate you taking the time. Looking forward to getting down to Gainesville. It's a trip. It's not a matter if. It's a matter of when, my friend, as you know. Excited to get down there to Florida and watch some baseball. And hopefully we can tee it up again.
Yeah, please. And hopefully I can play a little bit better.
You're the man, Nick. I appreciate you taking the time. We'll do it again soon, brother.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thank you.